Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, Paul. Good to be with you again. You know, a common subject these days has to do with the subject of trauma and how each of us has experienced some kind of trauma in our past. And unfortunately for many, it is still a very present reality. A theme I have been working on for a couple of years now is that each of us is an amalgamation of who we have been and what we have experienced in our past. And very often, that past continues to slip into our present, making us pray for our demons of the past. What if we could find a way to manage and deal with negative events of our past so that we could possibly live freer and less burdened lives? Our special guest today, Hince, has developed successful processes for dealing with past trauma in such a way as to reduce or even dismiss its impact on our lives. She offers some unique insights that we will certainly explore. Now, just a bit about Ann. When Ann Hince was 19, she woke up one morning to find her mother dead in her bathroom. 20 years later, the tears from that trauma were still just under the surface, but continued to have severe effects on her emotional well-being. As she was raising her two boys, Ann determined enough was enough, and she wanted to be what she calls a calm mom. It began when she realized she needed to change her ways of thinking, so she developed a three-pronged approach to unwinding the past. Today, Ann is a calm mom, and I want to find out just how she got there. With that, let's bring on our guest, Ann Hince. Welcome to the next chapter with Charlie.
Thanks, Charlie. It's fun to be here.
Yeah, and it shall be. Let's have fun during the show. What do you think?
Oh, yes, I think we will.
In situations like this, Ann, I'd frequently like to begin the show with definitions. And trauma is a very loaded term, and I think it would be very helpful if you describe for us in your terms, what is trauma? How would you define trauma?
I define it more generally in terms of a memory from the past is stored with emotion. So there's big traumas, there's big events like finding my mother, but there's also small traumas where someone teased me or teased someone else. And even phrases that we heard in childhood, one of my aunt's favorite phrases is, shame on you. That was stored inside with confusion and other emotions. So that in itself was a small trauma. So there's a big spectrum of trauma, my experience.
Oh, yeah, shame on you. You know, that is deep. And sort of interesting about shame on you is that we take it, but we don't even realize it's traumatic. We don't even realize for a long time how that has impacted us and made such a negative, degrading sort of feeling about who we are, what we say, what we're capable of. Terrible phrase. And it was so common in my youth. I don't know if it was common in yours.
For sure. Yeah, but it just sinks into our subconscious mind. It's part of our programming from childhood. So until we start to unravel, we don't really become aware of the emotions that are stored with it.
You know, are there traumas, and I think, you know, maybe shame on you is one of them, but are there other traumas in our lives that we didn't even know at the time, or maybe even later, that we have experienced a trauma, and yet it's impacting our daily lives in significant ways? Is that possible, that we experience trauma and we don't even realize it?
Absolutely. There is so much. I mean, I have experienced so much that I had no awareness of before. I mean, I didn't even know my mother's death was affecting me until something happened in my late 30s. Up until that point, I thought I'd left it all behind. But I hadn't. It just gets stored inside of us. And so much. I mean, at this point, I can put my awareness inside my head and feel the tension, and there is so much tension inside my head still that I had no awareness of. And I know at this point that most, if not everyone else, has tension stored inside of them from their past. They are just not aware of it.
Let me get a bit personal now. You said you experienced tension. Can you describe when you realized that your mother's death had a significant impact on your life? How did that impact you in your daily behavior, your daily feeling about yourself? I know parenting is so important to you, the way you parented. What were some of the experiences you had as a result of that trauma?
Of course, I didn't realize it was my trauma that was affecting me, but I was very reactionary. I was very jumpy. I was very scared mother. So I spent my days trying to remain safe almost. And it was all because those tears were still just under the surface. So it didn't take much to let all those emotions start bubbling over the top. So I didn't have much of a cup that could be filled any further, right? It was right at the top already, all these emotions inside of me. And it was just to flow over all the time. And I was very jumpy, and I knew I wanted to be different. I did not want to be that person anymore.
And I bet it's common to think it's just part of your psychological profile, that you are just a sensitive, reactive person, and yet there is a catalyst that is driving that for you. And until we identify that catalyst or that event, it's really never going to stop, is it?
Right, and I'm not sure it ever would have stopped, except that I had something that happened. I had what I call a business altercation with a couple of other mothers at my boys' school, and they were very different from me. They were self-confident, self-assured, and in my mind, they were authority-type women. They told me, scared mother, that I had done something wrong.
Oh.
And my mind just spun out of control. It just went over and over all the things that had happened, what I'd said, what they'd said, what I did, what I could have done differently, just all the different permutations. 3 days. It was at the end of that time frame that I realized, okay, well, first of all, I realized this isn't normal. These people don't react this intensely. But I also realized it felt a little bit like how I would react when my dad would tell me I'd done something wrong. That was the first little inkling that, maybe something from my childhood is still affecting me to this day.
When they were talking about that, were they talking about recent events, the things you did wrong, or they were trying to say there's something histrionic going on? They were probably more contemporary.
It was just a business altercation. They didn't think I'd made the right business decision, and I thought I had. That is such a similar feeling event I had from my past, which broke through and allowed me to see that, okay, it's similar to that, so maybe something that's replaying.
So this is something, I'm sure our listeners can all identify, because this is something that is so common in the human condition, is that we are constantly questioning our motives, our actions. Are we doing the right thing? And then we feel remorseful if we say the bad thing. And it's sort of pretending that we have control of our lives. And, I'm not so confident we have control of our lives, although I believe we have influence over our lives and that we can influence many things, but we can't control things. Does that ring a bell to you?
What I think of it in terms of the law of attraction. I have my own understanding of the law of attraction. I think of us in terms of a signal. Everything about us is a signal. And that signal gets established in childhood. So when we experience trauma in childhood, it gets stored in our subconscious mind with these emotions and that trauma. That's then part of our signal. And so we emit that signal, we attract back into our future based on that signal. So if the feeling that is stored inside of us is perhaps someone saying shame on you, right? So for me, the emotions that were stored with that were confusion, because why should I be ashamed of myself because it's something that I thought I was doing right? All those permutations of those emotions stored with that thought, that phrase, then that's part of my signal. As I go through life, signals being emitted, and I attract back the same feeling. Well, I attract back into my future things, events, circumstances that bring up that same feeling of confusion. So all of those things from childhood, all the traumas, the big traumas, the little traumas, everything gets put inside of us, and it's then our signal, and we keep repeating same feeling over and over again until we realize that's what it is and we let it go.
Do those signals build upon one another where you start at like stage A at 8 years old, but by the time you're 28 years old, that signal is exacerbated and become much stronger than it was even at 8 years old?
Yes, because we keep replaying them, and every time we replay it, it's stored. I believe it's my experience at this point that it's put in our connective tissue or our fascia as tension, as tightness. That's why as we get older, we tend to get tighter and we compress and we shrink, because that connective tissue just tightens over the years.
You know, I want to tell you a story that I learned about karma and the idea of a positive versus negative energies that we put out into the world. And I heard an expert on karma help me understand it much differently. And I think our common way of viewing karma is it's sort of transactional. If you do good, then a good thing will happen to you. If you do poorly, a poor thing will happen to you. But according to this expert, that was not what trauma was about. Or not trauma, excuse me. That was not what karma is about. Karma is about exuding positive energy. That you are positive, you're looking for positive, you're producing positive, you're thinking upward, and that way you are capable of receiving positive energy. However, if you have this negative view and this downtrodden view, that's the kind of energy you will receive. So that has really struck with me, and I love that concept that if I try to be positive, my whole receptive energy is much more positive than if I'm negative. My negative receptibility seems to be stronger. Does that resonate with you in any way?
No, it doesn't, actually. I don't believe that.
Oh, really? Good. I love a debate.
Okay. So I believe that inside, ideally, underneath all the trauma, all that energy that we have stuck inside of us, underneath, we are perfect. We are light, and we are free, but we store this energy inside us. We store all these traumas inside of us over the years. All we need to do is find the negative and allow it to release. And then the light, the positive is already underneath. So we need to look at the darkness. We need to look at the negative thoughts we're having so that they can be accepted and released. I don't actually believe we need to focus on the positive at all, because it comes naturally once we release the negative.
Oh, that's interesting. I probably have, we could have a whole show on that one, because I agree with you, and I think, to me, both sides have some validity, but I really like your idea that we are naturally more positive, and it's the occurrences in our life that give us this negative sort of viewpoint.
We actually try to think positive. The word try, T-R-Y. We try and think positively. What we're actually doing is we're suppressing the actual thought that is there. When we suppress it, it doesn't go anywhere, it stays inside of us. If you want to actually change your future, you need to change those negative thoughts. We actually need to allow them to release from the body so that they don't come back again. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to change who I was. I didn't have to do. I didn't want to have to meditate. I didn't want to have to do something on an ongoing basis. I actually wanted to be different so that I would experience life differently.
And from that foundation, you have developed a sort of a three-pronged process, have you not?
My subconscious mind opened up and my self-awareness deepened. I used different techniques.
Yeah, I want to talk about those, but I got a couple of questions, as you might guess, a couple of comments and questions. But you said something to me in an earlier conversation. I'm kind of transitioning to a little bit different of a subject, but you said something to me that I consider a very profound statement, and that is, you suggested to me that what we are being today is what we will become tomorrow. I love that we set up our history or who we're going to be tomorrow. I find that to be such a strong statement. What we are being today is what we will become tomorrow. Talk to me about what you meant by that.
I love the word becoming, because what we are being now, that's our signal that we're emitting, what's going to come back in our future. So simply trying to take a different thought, not really going to change much of our future, but if we want to change ourselves at a deep level, that's what this work does. It changes our connective tissue in our body. We are physically a different signal. What is going to come to us is going to be different.
I like that. So I wonder if we're getting near your strategy, but I have a question that I was going to ask and I don't like the question. So I'm going to the next one. Before we get into your process, your 3-step process, that I know is more involved than just 3 simple steps. There's a lot involved in it. But before we get into that, there is something you pointed out to me that also I had never considered. And maybe I've been talking about it. I was just on a spiritual retreat and I was talking to several people. I wasn't leading the retreat. I was on a private retreat and I met some other private retreatants. And I brought up the idea of what you said that I think is something, Anne, I've never even considered, and that is, for every deep emotion we feel, there is a physical impact as well as an emotional impact. And after considering your proposition, I totally concur that feelings are not sans physical. There is a physical ramification for each of our feelings. And you know what I was wondering? If perhaps you could explain these powerful emotional/physical ideas. And I thought of just a couple of emotions that we can all, I think, as soon as you said them, I identified with the physical ramifications, and that was anger and fear. Can you describe for us, although we can probably all access it right away, but I would love for you to describe some of the physical effects of one of these emotions of anger or fear? You talked to fascia, you talked all sorts of, give me an idea what the physical connection to emotional ill well-being is about.
Okay, so it's okay to an emotion that's not quite as intense. So let's do something like frustration. Imagine something that you're frustrated about, and it could be politics, could be something at work, something at home, but imagine something that you're frustrated about and feel that frustration. It is stored in the physical, that there is tension in some places in your body as you're feeling frustration. Whether you can pinpoint them or notice them is going to depend on your level of self-awareness. So feel for a moment and feel if you can feel frustration in the body. Can you feel it, Charlie?
Oh, yes. I feel it because the frustration is often a challenge to my core being. I'm frustrated because things don't turn out the way that I want. And of course, the way that I want is the correct way. And then I feel, let me see, what do I feel? I feel a tenseness. I feel a sense of being attacked, that I feel defensive. And my defensive mechanisms in my body, I'm ready to go, I'm ready to weaponize almost. Did I go too far?
No, that's great. So you have words and stories associated with frustration. You can feel kind of a general unease in the body.
Right.
Can you find a specific place, a specific set of muscles or pressure in your body where you feel frustration? It's okay to say no.
I so agree, and yet I've never thought of that. I've always thought of it as a mental construct, and that the defensiveness is mental, and my frustration is mental, and it is strictly mental and emotional, but the physicality is so strong, it's so important that, you can find, back to the words you didn't want to talk about, but anger and fear, you can see in another person, you can see the physical attributes of that. You can see when they're angry, red-faced, yelling. It's a very physical event. It's not just an emotional event.
Yes, and we use the words, the emotional words, so we use fear or anger, those words, to describe how we're feeling. We're actually noticing on some level, at least when we started to learn the words, noticed on some level we were feeling tension in certain places. We describe that. This process reverses that. So we're aware of the word of the emotion. I'm feeling fear or afraid. As we do more and more work and we deepen our self-awareness, we become aware of the physical sensations that we are calling fear, which is a deeper level of self-awareness.
Got it. So how does the physicality of emotion, how does that fit into your paradigm of healing from trauma? You know that you feel it, but you have ideas of how you deal with it. Is that part of your 3 steps?
My 3 steps started without knowing that depth of awareness. So a lot of people are not aware, right? They're very aware of the words, the description, the events of what makes them feel angry or frustrated or whatever. That technique that I used there was called EFT, which is short for Emotional Freedom Technique. It's also called tapping because we're tapping on certain meridian points on our body as we're talking something through. So having the words is really useful at that point. So for me, I had the words of what happened around my mother's death. I could tell the story, even though I wasn't necessarily aware of the emotions or the physical sensations.
You know what I want to do? I want to explore, because you have 3 brilliant processes, and I want to spend the rest of our time on that. But before we do, I'd like to take a break, and then we'll come right back at it. Is that okay with you?
Sounds good.
Hi there, this is Charlie Hedges, and you are listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie. And my very special guest today is Ann Hince, and we are talking about my title, Unwinding Your Past. And we are talking about trauma and the physicality of the emotion. And our guest, Ann Hince, has a 3-step process and of healing from this. And I want to get into each of them, and your first step in your process. Well, let me even ask a prelude to that question. How did you arrive at these 3 steps?
I arrived at the first one by going to a doctor's appointment, and this doctor happened to be a parent at my boys' school. He knew I was a stay-at-home mother with 2 healthy boys and everything should have been good. He asked me what my stress level was. And I said it was an 8 out of 10, and then he asked me why. It was then that I realized, it was finding my mother dead on the bathroom floor 20 years prior, because I was in my late 30s when I started this journey. I found her when I was 19. So the tears from that event were still just under the surface. He was a holistic physician, so he had more tools in his toolbox than most doctors do. He happened to know this technique called EFT. He tapped with me about my mother's death for about 15 minutes. I walked away being able to tell the story of her death in my mind for the first time ever without the tears. And that's when I realized that we hold those memories and those emotions physically in our body, and that we could let them go. So I had no idea up to that point that I could do that. That was the beginning. And then I worked with this technique, and I realized that my self-awareness was deepening. I got to the place that I didn't need EFT anymore, and I developed another technique that I call feeling your feelings.
Yeah, let's go. Let's stay on first one, can we? And then we go to feeling your feelings, because I feel very strongly about feeling your feelings. I think it's so insightful. But this EFT, emotional freedom technique, you were able to talk about your mother's death, but on a more, I don't want to say rational, but not quite so emotional level. Why was that? What brought that about?
Had to do the tapping.
Tapping. You're going to have to explain that to us. We don't know tapping.
Okay, it's a very simple, easy technique. You can learn it. I have an EFT demo on my YouTube channel that it's like 6 minutes long. So it's given away for free by the person who developed it, Gary Craig. I think some people kind of pass over it because they think it's weird or too simple or something. What you're doing is you're tapping on specific places on your head and your collarbone and under your arm, a series of 9 places. You're tapping on them as you're talking something through, and the tapping itself releases the energy stored in the nervous system from that event.
You mean just the finger tapping on your forehead or on your arm?
Yeah, I mean, it's a series of, I can tell you the points. The first one's on the top of the head, the crown point, then the beginning of the eyebrows, bone on the edge of the eye, under the nose, the chin, the collarbone, and under the arm.
Oh.
Those are the points.
Does this have anything to do with chakras?
It's more Chinese medicine, a little bit like acupressure.
Okay.
Tapping on acupressure points.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
It releases that energy that's stored in the nervous system. So when I was at the doctor's, I talked through what happened that morning to find my mum, let the tears flow, and I just talked through the event. And then what you do is you go back to the beginning, you talk through it again, then back to the beginning and you talk through it again. And each time you're opening up the subconscious, allowing the energy to release, and more details of the memory come to mind, and then you tap through those. And you get to the place where you can just talk through the event and there's no emotion left anymore. And at that point, that memory is free.
Amazing. And that happens through the tapping process. And that's on your website, how to do that?
It's on my YouTube channel.
On your YouTube channel. Okay, I'll make sure we have all those links and put them in the show notes. It's sort of a rational, cognizant evaluation of the event without allowing the emotions to sort of interfere and define that. Is that correct?
You're allowing the emotions to flow. What you're doing is you're finding your actual truth, exactly what happened, exactly how you felt. You're just allowing truth to be and tapping and allowing the energy of it to release.
Okay, so you have this energy. You understand from a different level, you understand the trauma, and then you go to your next step, which is feeling your feelings or feel your feelings, which...
Let me go back a bit first.
Please.
Because it's not quite that simple. I realized how powerful EFT was by actually trying it out. I had a cat at home at the time who was 17 and his kidneys were starting to fail. And I have an engineering background. I like to know something works before I spend my time on it. Knew the person who developed EFT was a chemical engineer, which gave me a little bit more confidence. I wanted to try it out on something simple. So I'll tell you what I did because it might help explain it. So I had to give this cat a saline injection, a shot of saline every day. The first day my hand was shaking so badly because I was so afraid of giving him this shot. So, okay, let me try out this technique. I tapped about it and I tapped about every aspect of it. I tapped about my hand shaking, tapped about my fear of hurting my cat, and I tapped about all the memories from all the injections I had had over the years, which was many. The next day, when I gave him the shot, the needle just slid right in. There was no more fear left inside of me. My hand was totally calm, felt totally confident doing it. So that's when I realized how powerful it was. And I started to use it every day. The first step, everyone, is to be able to notice when you're becoming emotional rather than getting caught up in the emotions. So I would, and myself, I could only do it once a day to begin with. I'm just noticing, okay, I'm getting frustrated now. So then I could stand back and say I'm getting frustrated rather than getting caught up in the frustration. And at that point, I would tap. I would bring myself back to a calm place, carry on with my day. I realized things were changing. I was starting to feel more peaceful inside, and I wanted it more, and I wanted it faster. So I wrote down every emotional memory I could think of from my childhood. All the big traumas, all the little traumas, all those phrases we talked about. I tapped through one each night for an hour to an hour and a half each night until I'd gone through the whole list. That's when things really started to shift faster, and I realized my self-awareness was deepening. That's when it started to come to the second step.
And so on these tapping points, they brought a new sense of understanding of the issues that you were dealing with.
Yes, well, it's opening up the subconscious mind. And as that happens, our awareness deepens. So I became aware of my emotions that I hadn't been aware of before. Became aware of those physical sensations under the emotions that I hadn't been aware of before. It was just a process. Just happens as you release the emotions and the memories and the traumas. Awareness just expands.
So you're aware of the physical attributes of the emotions. Does that move to the next step then of feeling your feelings?
Yes. I happened to be in a group at the time. We were studying Course of Miracles. The kind of guru in the group would say every week, don't have to meditate. It's all about feeling your feelings. At the beginning, I didn't know what my feelings were. I was doing EFT outside of the group as the group went week to week. Every week he would say this, and at one point I realized I was aware of what my feelings were. I could feel them. So I thought, okay, one day I thought, let me try and do that. What does that even mean, right? How do you do that? I was at the kitchen sink and I was doing the dishes, and I realized I was thinking a thought that had negative emotion attached. It could be something like, I'm afraid of making a phone call.
Mm-hmm.
And I would think the thought and feel the fear. It has to be able to be aware of where that fear is inside of us, and I was at that point. So I would try and feel the fear, as he said, feel your feelings. And I realized I couldn't keep hold of that fear because I'd suppressed it for so long it didn't know how to be felt.
Right.
The way I could do it is I had to stop and be like a statue. I had to feel that fear, and for me, fear would be in the solar plexus, the stomach area. I would feel it. I'd have to stop right there. I'd have to stop in my breath. I couldn't take a deep breath because if I took a deep breath, I would lose my focus on that fear. I would stop right there where I could feel that fear. I would talk to it. I'd say things like, okay, I can feel you right there. Feel you right there. I just want to feel you. Don't want to change you. Don't want to love you. I just want to allow you to be felt. And of course, I'd have to take a deep breath at some point, let it out, and then I'd think the thought again. I noticed that the fear had diminished a little bit. Then I would do it again. Feel the fear, allow it to release a little bit. Take a deep breath, think the thought again. At some point, the fear would totally disappear, at which point that thought is then free, and it becomes easy to make the phone call.
If we may, I know it's a very sensitive subject, but if we may go back to, since we use this as an illustration, if we go back to your discovering your mother, where is the line? Because it seems possible if you feel the fear, can that fear, if you feel it too strongly without, or feel it so strongly without any sort of remedy, can that be harmful? Can that actually put you deeper into a state of trauma? You know, you're feeling that fear, or you're feeling that remorse, you're feeling that shock, that it just puts you back in that state again. I mean, that's what I'm wondering about feeling. Can it have a reverse effect for you?
It can if you're not doing anything about it, right? Because it's the signal. You're back in that emotional state, emitting that signal again, and you're kind of reestablishing it. hardening it inside of you. If you're doing something like tapping, you're feeling it and releasing it. If you're feeling your feelings, you're actually releasing it, that it's no longer in there. Because I realized over time, all these emotions and these memories are just energy that is stuck in the body. Wants to leave. It would have done if we had given it the attention at the time, but we didn't. We stored it inside. What we need to do is we need to go back to it. Give it the attention. Attention, that's another word. The words stuck together, at tension. That's what we're doing here. We're holding tension, and then it releases, which is all it wanted in the first place.
Do you sort of create almost a new reality in that you view this situation from a very different perspective, that it had nothing to do with you, you were not responsible, it was an act that you saw and it was a sad act that you need to somehow remove yourself from any sense of responsibility or blame? Is that part of it?
To begin with, you want to take full responsibility. Yes, as you release the emotions, then understanding and compassion arises on its own, which is such an experience if you've never had that before. I had never had that before. And you start to see from different perspectives. This whole process actually allows you to begin to see from different perspectives that you hadn't seen before, both mentally and physically, because I have released so much tension in my neck, which is the third step we get to, that my neck will move into all sorts of different perspectives than it has in the past. It allows you to see from different perspectives, mentally as well.
I have a rather, I guess, you could call it a traumatic childhood of abandonment and rejection and shame. And I look at those now and I realize so many of them were not me. They were brought upon me by other people. And yet I took them very personally. And yet when I was unaware of any kind of tapping, but as I reformulated those, I understand that I am not the responsible party and I don't need to hold on to that. And yet there's another part of it, Anne, that was really helpful, and I wonder how this fits in your program, is that they made me the person I am today, in that I now can understand and I can identify with abandonment and rejection, and I understand the feelings and emotions and the physicality of other people, and I can be a much more understanding resource for these people to look at it from a different perspective. Isn't there a learning that goes on with that as well?
There is, but I've realized over time that you actually have to go in and feel those emotions before you can do that releasing and allowing it to be someone else's responsibility, because we took on those emotions, so that shame and that abandonment lives inside of us. We can't just mentally shift to say, okay, it wasn't our fault, it was our parents' fault or our caregiver's fault, because we still keep those emotions inside of us. I've realized over the years that you have to actually feel those emotions and allow them to release, and then the understanding arises naturally. It's not a mental process, it just happens.
You are absolutely right. For years and years and years, I could mentally come to those conclusions, but until I came to the time that I never realized that I was really accessing the physicality of the emotions. But when I did that, how that made me feel, how I behaved, what made me think of myself, and the tension that occurred. And when I realized that, there was also a feeling for me of release, that this was not me. This was not necessarily my responsibility, although we always have some sort of responsibility, but as a 5-year-old, how much do you have? And it was the realization of my feelings that I was able to release, to say these are false feelings. These are feelings that are destructive feelings, and that and that can't be helpful. So I agree with you that's why I love this idea of the physicality of emotions. And when you identify those areas, it's so helpful for you.
Thank you. It's something I didn't know before.
Yeah.
So.
Well, let's move on to your third step, and I have it written, and tell me if I have it written correctly. Go inside your body as a means of releasing tension.
So what I did when I was feeling the feelings, I started to use that every day instead of using EFT or tapping. And in the evenings, instead of tapping through my childhood, which I had done already, I started to tap through collective events, things like 9/11, where we all had our own individual experience of that event, or the Loma Prieta earthquake, those big things. I would just lay on the sofa and allow those feelings to surface again, just allow them to be felt, and they would release. And it was an amazing journey. At some point during that journey, I realized I could keep my awareness inside of me after the tension had released. So the way I try and explain it is, imagine you have a toothache or a stomachache. You can pinpoint with your feeling senses where that pain is coming from, right?
Yes.
But once the pain has subsided, you can't feel with your senses where that pain was coming from again, because there's nothing calling your attention to it.
And so where do you find it, like 9/11? Where do you find that if you have no source of origin? Where do you find that feeling of oh gosh, you know, so many adjectives. Where do you find those feelings?
Okay, so that's talking step 2. I'm talking step 3. So step 2, something like 9/11, there's emotions involved and there's memories involved. So I would think about something that happened on 9/11 and just allow the emotions or the feelings of that to surface and release. Now I'm talking 3, where I could put my awareness inside my body. At that point, there's no words involved. It's just feeling. So I'm out of my thinking mind. I'm in my feeling mind. I'm just feeling tension inside the body. I had never experienced this before. It was all new to me. So it's not very easy to put into words. I noticed I could keep my awareness inside, so I just started to play with it. I would move my awareness around inside, and I could feel where there was tension versus no tension. So I would focus on the tension, feel it, doing exactly the same as I did with the feelings. Just allow the tension to be felt, and I noticed it would shift. Then I would do it again, and it would shift a little bit more. And so over the weeks and the months, I would just move around my torso, find the place that had the most tension, focus on it, allow it to release, just over and over again. And sometimes a memory would pop up. So a place memory would pop up. So as the tension inside released, memory would release with it. That's how I know that memories are connected to that tension inside. Well, I wasn't using that. I was using the physical tension itself.
And Hince, this is brilliant. This is, this is such a unique, I've never heard anything like this. And yet I feel you are really on to something, and this is bang on. Just as in closing, tell me, I read earlier where you wanted to be a calm mom. You're more of a calm mom. How is life different now than it was 20 years ago?
I'm very calm and very peaceful. And I actually go out of my way to find things that will trigger me now. I'll watch the news and see how I feel and feel those feelings and release it. So I'm not nearly as reactionary as I used to be, which is fun. In a day-to-day thing, I can just go about my life and not be too concerned what happens.
Yeah, you can experience life in its beauty. And Hince, you are so bright, and you really bring new information to the table, and I'm sure our listeners will identify. I want to thank you so much for being on The Next Chapter with Charlie.
Thank you. That was a great conversation.
Thank you so much. And I also want to thank all our listeners for tuning in to our show, The Next Chapter with Charlie. And as usual, until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.